Glin Bailey is a negotiation specialist and author, known in corporate circles as the value negotiator. She is the author of The Negotiation Playbook, a rare double winner at the Australian Business Book Awards. But what makes her genuinely different from every other negotiation expert I've come across is this. She believes the most important negotiation you'll ever have is not with a client, not with a supplier, not with your board. It's the one that you have with yourself. Glin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Well, it is my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Perhaps we could start off with you just telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey.
Yeah, I started where most commercial negotiation experts start, in industry. And my discipline prior to being in the negotiation space was commercial finance. So I'm actually a management accountant by background. I spent best part of 2 decades in large multinational corporates, working in commercial finance teams, and then navigating the challenges and the opportunities that come with internal stakeholders in sales, procurement, IT, HR, and then beyond into external customers, in particular the retailers in the UK, which is where I started my career. So I worked for a bread business, and a lot of our commercial contracts were around negotiating deals with the largest retailers in the UK. I then moved to Australia in 2015, still within my commercial finance career, working out here for a company called George Weston Foods, so a manufacturing business with multiple different companies underneath that. And I transitioned then out of George Weston Foods 3.5 years later into my own business, venturing into self-employment for the first time ever in my career and navigating multiple negotiations with myself around what I was doing, where I was going, and then transitioned from executive coaching, which is what I left to do, into negotiation training and development later on. So very mixed career journey, definitely not a linear journey to my own personal development and growth journey. And hence why I say that the biggest negotiation we often have is the one that we have with ourselves around who we're meant to be, what we're meant to be doing, and how we navigate our careers and our businesses alike.
Wonderful. Thank you. Here's what I wonder about negotiation as a topic. The entire industry is built on a promise that if you learn the tactics, you master the framework, then you will close the deal. But I think that the research is pretty clear that most people walk out of even the best negotiation training and often revert back to their old behavior when they get under pressure. I guess that suggests that maybe training isn't the problem, the framework isn't the problem, but there's something inside that is. And your book, it makes a case that I really haven't heard anybody else explain or clarify before in this direct manner, that there are actually two negotiations happening: the negotiation between you and the other party, and then there's the one that's going on inside your head. And I guess that's probably why you won 2 awards or awards in 2 categories at this book awards that I mentioned before. So for most people, the second one, the one inside your head, is the real challenge. Is that the argument, do you think, here?
What I think about, and I think because my background's commercial finance, and having spent years in executive coaching environments and then latterly training people in commercial negotiation capability, what I've seen time and time again as to what stops people maximizing the deals that they get with their suppliers, with their customers, is the inner negotiation they've had with themselves first around, oh, I can't say that because they won't let me have that. If I say this, I might offend them. And we see that happen time and time again, not only in our professional careers, but in our personal lives. Or, I can't ask for the pay rise because they'll likely say no. So maybe I just won't ask and I'll just deliver good work. Or perhaps it's a negotiation for a house purchase and it's like, oh, I don't want to lose the house and I've got this emotional attachment, so I'll just pay overs rather than really thinking about what is it that I actually want and what's the best deal available, and searching for the best deal available. And I think when you reference the people go back to their old behaviors after a negotiation training program, and having the tools and the framework shared with them is because their identity hasn't shifted from the person that they were prior to coming into the session to the person than they leave as. And they've still not necessarily considered, am I operating from a future desired version of myself? And is that future desired version of myself someone who's far more capable in making a firm position, an argument for what I want, standing assertively? Am I open to seeing myself as capable in this particular area, or appropriately asking for what I want without it being seen as something to be feared in any way for rejection or otherwise from others? And I think it's that piece around the identity, who we're choosing to become, that people aren't really thinking about. And I have spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about who I'm becoming, what I want my life to stand for, who I want to be, and the impact that I want to make on the world, that when I'm thinking about the learning that I do and the skills I take on board, it's with that identity lens in mind rather than just a tactical.
When did you first notice that you were doing that to yourself?
In terms of looking at my lens through the identity piece?
Yeah, and that in negotiations that there was actually two things that were going on: the other parties and the internal.
Yeah, so I was first trained in commercial negotiation skills when I was in finance, and I was in my early 20s. And the bigger challenge that I had then was I would have friction points with sales, right? And then later procurement. So, the ongoing joke would be, oh, sales just want to give away margin to make the sale, and finance, the say no police, they're never going to say yes. So there'd be this internal friction point constantly. And I remember having a really robust argument, I would say, in the office with one of my sales team, who I was absolutely convinced was just focused on looking good with the customers and not necessarily advocating for the business's best margin position. And I looked at who I was being in that, and I could see that I cared about the business result, but I was in judgment around what his perception was. So I assumed and judged him for being someone who cared about how he looked rather than how the business performed. And then I started noticing with that is I am having this internal dialogue about who I am and who you are long before I'm actually getting into the external realities of, are we aligned on where we're heading in the business? What do you see when I think about this challenge, or what do I see when I think about this challenge? And I wasn't creating that distance or space for us to actually look at what our internal belief systems were and then what we actually needed to do externally. And I saw it often when I thought about promotion. So that was one example in the commercial dynamic where the friction existed. But I also saw that early on in my 20s, I had this real ambition and drive, and I wanted to reach senior management as quickly as I could. And I was waiting for my leaders to tell me that I was capable. And then this inner chatter of, oh, you're not good enough because they're not saying that you're ready for a promotion. And it took me finally saying to one of my line managers at the time, do you think I'm ready for senior management? Because I'd seen this role advertised internally. And he said, yeah, absolutely. You should totally go for it. And then I'm sitting back thinking, well, why the heck have you not shared this insight with me before? And it's taken me to ask you. And that's when I realized is that we spend a lot of time in our own heads making assumptions about ourselves, our capabilities. We don't often have that mirror back that we hope someone is going to hold, that you're capable or you can do this differently. And when I realized that dialogue was happening in me and that I should just lean in to ask the question and get that mirror back more intentionally, that's when things started to shift. That relationship with the difficult salesperson shifted only after I'd been formally trained in negotiation skills, and I could see, okay, I'm in my own head, and what I haven't done is consider what's in your head. And we often do that. We get into our own heads rather than the other parties.
Do you think, I mean, that is, I feel, unlocking a superpower to be able to self-analyze, to be able to stop and break down performance in a manner which is not self-critical because one is inherently self-critical or pumping up one's own tires. It is just to simply self-analyze. I think that's a superpower. Do you think, and in your experience, have you found that once they get it, most people can learn to do that?
Yes, I think there is a opportunity for learning and knowledge, 100%. But it's the integration of that learning and knowledge into practice that is absolutely the key thing. So we can know inherently what's good for us. Whether or not we do that is often a very different thing. Whether it comes to our health, our well-being, we know exercise and drinking water is right. Do we drink recommended litres a day, or do we do the recommended steps a day? Not always. The same is true for negotiation capability and self-awareness, self-regulation. We know what good leadership looks like, but yet, we don't always act in the best ways. And I think from my perspective, absolutely everything can be learnt, and certainly negotiation capability, yes. But the embodiment of that is something you have to consciously choose. And that's why I say when you link it to an identity, it becomes a shortcut way of actually embodying a skill set, right? So if I see myself, and when I named myself as the value negotiator, it acted as a shortcut because it became an identity. Then I thought, oh gosh, if I'm not actually value negotiating in this context, am I really that? Shortcutting it into an identity meant that I looked for the skills and the behaviors that would be appropriate for that identity.
Yeah. So you need to evolve or create an identity that is optimal for that situation. So, yeah. And so does that, prior to the creation of that identity, normally previously, when does the negotiation or the inner negotiation happen? Is it only happening in the interaction in the room, or is it always there?
It's always
yeah, it's the
always
identity.
there. It's always there. It's the what they call the inner joker within. That's always 1 minute your friend, then the next minute it's not. So when you talk about the self-critic, yes, you can have a self-critic, but then you've got the inner cheerleader as well. But you can't necessarily always rely on which one it's going to be. And that's the internal chatter. It's the internal negotiation. It's the itty bitty shitty committee in our heads at times. And we see that, right? But if I look, so say, for example, you're working with a lot of CEOs and founders of organizations that are looking to scale. And when I think about their identity, yes, there'll be CEOs and there'll be founders, right? But the CEO that's looking to scale from a 50 million business to a $200 million business is going to have a different sense of their future identity than the CEO that's thinking about linear growth going from 50 million to 55 million growth in the next 2 or 3 years. And so your identity shapes who you choose to become, because either you're acting from the identity of your current self as you are, or as you've been, or what's got you here, versus the identity of your future self as the CEO of a 200 million business, and therefore what actions I need to take if I'm running a $200 million business, and the structures I need to set up in my team, the negotiations that need to happen about the agreements that my team are operating to for targets, for ambition, for vision, become very different. And so that's where identity for me plays a big part in negotiation, because negotiation isn't just commercial deals, it's the agreements we're making with our teams every single day, the agreements we're making with ourselves about what we will and won't do. It's agreements full stop. And most of everything we do is centered around agreements, whether it's getting your team to take ownership for a particular transformation program of work, or accountability for getting a sales target. But it's the identity as a business we choose, or the identity as a leader that we choose, that determines what frame we look through.
So not confronting or evolving that internal identity. What does that cost if you were to think across a longer term period? I mean, you kind of touched on it there, but to just scratch that itch a little bit more. And I say that because in the books that I've written, I've very much tried to be very clear about the price that one is paying by not undertaking whatever it might be, onboarding or being a better CEO. What is the price here that we're paying by not evolving this identity?
I think from my perspective, and I'll speak from my own experience, is the biggest frustration that I have had over my life is feeling like I am not fulfilling my greatest potential. Right. And when I feel that frustration and this ick in my body where there's this tension inside between the person that I know I'm capable of becoming and then the reality that I might be facing in that moment, I'm recognizing that's another moment where there's an identity tension, there's a negotiation tension, there's an agreement tension that I've got going on. But when I notice that if I don't embrace that tension, if I don't embrace the discomfort, if I don't embrace working through that tension, me staying the same and not evolving costs me myself. It's that connection with myself. It's this sense of I've betrayed myself because I haven't given myself the opportunity to become the person I know I can be. And I'm staying in what's familiar and safe and might be comfortable in the moment, but actually over time becomes a much greater area for discomfort.
Yeah, it's because it's not only I could have got another 2% on that deal. It's much more you're sacrificing your ambition, your future potential. I love that. That's a great answer.
Yeah, and when you talk about whether it's the 2% on the deal or another 50 million on your revenue or that translation down into profitability, it impacts your ambition and it impacts your vision. And if your vision is then smaller, then what you achieve becomes correlated with that vision, right? So our ability to get over ourselves and
Yeah.
our own inner narrative and that inner negotiation allows us to then step into the possibility of who our businesses can become and what we stand for and the size and then the contribution we make as that business grows and is able to give back more, create more opportunity in the workforce in your area, be an expert in your particular capability set that changes the industry in some way. I think those inner negotiations all determine how ambitious we allow ourselves to be and the identities that we choose to step into.
This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan to build the business that you want and the life that you want. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. And you can also check out our books, Made to Thrive, which is about the 5 roles of a CEO, becoming a great CEO rather than just a good CEO in your business. Second is Onboarded, which is about hiring and onboarding great people, making sure that you give yourself the greatest chance for people to succeed in your organization. And then third is Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better, which is about building a business that is better rather than bigger. It's not about building a little business. It's about building a business that compounds, a business that you can actually fall in love with again. That's excellent. So in the book, you talk about the value method. It's the 5-part process. Now, many of our listeners would have experienced a negotiation, which one might describe as I forgot the name. Uneven. I was going to say there's a Goliath and I forgot the name of it. Yeah, but an uneven where you're a small to medium-sized organization and you're against a massive corporation with excellent buying power. So can you, a bit of a 2-part question, can you just explain the value method for us and what does that change for a person who's going to negotiate when they're going to walk in the room?
100%. So what you've just described there is there's a imbalance of power, right? So you've got one party who by nature of size is smaller and the other party is bigger and therefore the perceived buying power is much higher. And what I would say first and foremost is that's a scenario that a lot of people will find themselves in, right? Imbalance of power, whether it's size, whether it's capability, whether it's pricing. There's a number of different variables or levers that people might feel like they're at a disadvantage with. What the value method focuses on is 5 key areas to consider first and foremost. And what it does is it removes you out of the thinking that price or size is your only lever, because it's about value. So the first step, V, is actually about identifying the value that exists in the deal, not only from your perspective, but from the other party's perspective. Because if you can start to sit in your seat, their seat, and then objectively zoom out and look down at the overall opportunity here, you might see value that you wouldn't have seen if you were only looking from the lens of what do I need, right? So I might need this big customer because my capabilities in let's say it's a manufacturing company makes sense if I get a scale of volume, for argument's sake. So a big customer purchasing makes my efficiencies of my factory work better. But if we're thinking about the customer on the other side, what might they value? They might value actually quality, and the quality that you provide, because the process you take to create this product is far more considered or bespoke or more thoughtful than your competitors in that set, and they might value that reliability. Also, you being a supplier to them might help them negate any price inflation with other powerful manufacturers in the same space. So you can play a different role. So it's looking at, where's the value for them in choosing you, where's the value for you in choosing them, and how do prime and position that. The second part of the process is analyze. And what I always say is it's about analyzing the data. And there's only ever 2 sources. As complicated as the world can be, really, there's 2 sources of data, and it's published sources of data or people sources of data. So either you're going to get intelligence from your team, speaking to the market, speaking to the customers or suppliers, or you're going to get it through reports, through, records, whether that's internal KPIs and performance data, market commodity data, pricing data, competitor data set. So there's data. But when you can analyze the data, what it allows you to do is be more informed in the positioning of the value that you have. The third step is around leverage. So once you know where the value is, you've analyzed what that data looks like and where the intelligence is, you're then looking at leverage. So the L is leverage. So how can I create more leverage in this deal? By understanding where there's more power. And often with power, you think one party's got power. Yes, size is actual power. But the biggest influencing lever in a negotiation is the perception of power. So you always have the opportunity to influence someone's perception of your power if you have the insights and the intelligence and the data and you understand where value lies. But if you're constantly trying to only influence actual power, then you're at a disadvantage, because your size may not be something you can change quickly or simply. So you have to look at where there are opportunities to increase the perception of your power and the priming and the positioning that you can do. And power comes from lots of different levers, and leverage comes from different sources. It could be you've got leverage because they need you more than you need them, because you're the only source of that particular product or service. It could be you're the person or the business that can deliver it in a particular time frame that's workable for their agenda, and time is a lever that you've got on your side because there's no rush from your part, but that there is an urgency on their part. So you have to look for where is there leverage in the deal, that things that can start shifting the balance of power in your favor, or at least perceived balance of power. And then the uncomfortable part is the U is, are you going to embrace feeling uncomfortable? Because being a stand for your business and identifying the best deal for your business requires you to lean in, to look for where the opportunities exist that you may not otherwise do. Because often people negotiate the deal that's on the table, but there's probably so much more value available. But your willingness to ask the question that you're most scared to ask, but is the one that you want to most have answered, may stop you, right? So if you're...
I'm sorry, what is that question often? What is often the question? And we'll come back to E in a minute, but I've just got to ask that. What is the question that people are reluctant to ask?
I'll give you a personal example. So when I was buying a house a few years back now, I went to go and look at one in the same street that I was looking to buy. The one question, this is from a trained negotiator, we all have our humanness. But the one question I knew I needed to ask, because that house went under offer 2 days before I went to see this one, was to ask, how much did it go for? Did I ask that question? No. I freaked out because I thought, oh, if I ask that question, I don't want to be anchored to a higher position. And so I'm going to hold back and not ask. But it would have been helpful to know that information, because it would have calibrated more data for me to respond with. In commercial negotiations, it could be, who else are you talking to? What is the biggest concern that you've got around this deal at the moment that would prevent you from saying yes? Why wouldn't you choose us? If there was a reason that you would have to not select us, what would that be? And it's those kind of questions where you really know the answer is going to be useful for you, but your discomfort in either hearing it or what someone might say, or the lack of preparedness in your response might stop you from asking that question. So it's, how do we lean into the discomfort, because the opportunity is always on the other side of the discomfort we feel. And if you're feeling uncomfortable, it's likely they will be too. And then the final step in the value framework is the E, which is all about execution. And it's, how do we then execute the plan, assuming that we've had a plan and that we've been prepared into the negotiation. So a lot of that is around, what are we doing pre-negotiation to set the scene, to prime, to position our value prior to having the negotiation, so that we're influencing the other party's perception of us before we actually engage in the negotiation itself. And then what do we do during it in terms of managing our own discomfort, but also managing our language? Are we leaking information through the words that we use and the sentences we construct? Are we leaking information in our body language because I'm showing you my discomfort, or I'm flinching in some way every time I make a proposal that's potentially more ambitious than I actually need? So what am I giving away, and what is the other party giving away through non-verbal communication as well as verbal communication? And then what am I doing post-negotiation to ensure the deal that's agreed is actually what's executed, and the implementation matches what was discussed during the negotiation? So the execution allows us to have that review as well, to determine what worked, what didn't work, what would we do differently, and particularly, can I replicate this outcome if it was a great outcome again? And if so, how would I know I could replicate it? So what's the system that worked for us this time? What did we do really well? What's, as sports teams do, they play their tape back, and it's the equivalent of playing your own tape back to determine where did your performance really shine, and where was the opportunity where you think, actually, I've left something on the table there because we didn't do this. So the framework in itself is walking you through a process for you to self-reflect, look at what you're doing, who you're becoming, how you're acting in alignment with the ambition that you say you have. And when it comes to that power dynamic, is the recognition that when you take the conversation away from price alone, there is value to be found underneath that, because price is essentially a yardstick for something else that's actually more important somewhere. So it might be, hey, we've got to be more competitively viable. Okay, great. Is price the only area that you compete in, or are there other areas that are important in ensuring that you have a product that performs? Right. So starting to strip the conversation away from one lever, which will always make it a power battle, and then whoever's got the most power wins. But if you can strip price into its component parts of what constitutes a good package and a deal overall, you can start to influence the perception of your power far more effectively.
Yeah, that was the end bit that I was also looking for. How does that change when someone walks in the room and gives you, rather than one thing to focus on, it gives you multiple things, all which work toward the value rather than only the price?
Yeah. And I think the other thing that people confuse, and this is back to the identity piece, is who are they actually negotiating with, right? So
Yes.
I train large ASX listed businesses in negotiation capability, and they have size on their side. Right. And often when I'm speaking to them, I'll say, well, when someone comes to you wanting to negotiate and they're saying things like, hey, we'd really love to work with you for the long term, typically that's a clue that the other party perceives themselves as a disadvantage in power. Because those that feel powerful do not explicitly need to say, I'd love to work with you long term. It's inherent and it's implicit in the way they show up, the way they act, the way they conduct themselves. There's not this sense of subservience to the relationship. It's they're coming in as an equal already. So there's language people use or words people say that give away their sense of themselves. And that's why identity is a big thing. The other thing is when you're negotiating with someone who's got size in their favor, is your psychology is saying, I'm negotiating with this big company. And you've now put you as the David, and you've gone, oh, the Goliath is this big company. When the reality is, David's just negotiating with John,
Yeah, yeah.
across the table, or Sarah or Sally, whoever it is. It's not David versus a big company identity. It's David with one other human or another couple of humans in the room. And when you can start to recognize, actually, you're not negotiating with the organization, you're actually negotiating with an individual, that's when you can start to even out your perception of the other party's power with your own sense of self and your level of preparedness. Because likely, if you've put the prep in, you've got the individual advantage, whereas the people that don't give that same level of intention to the prep don't get the same outcomes.
Negotiation can be tough, challenging, and draining. You talk about emotional quotient or EQ and how some people can get into negotiations and get knocked around by that. If they don't have that EQ, or if that EQ is missing, it can upend the deal or create challenges. So how does EQ work in negotiations, and why is it such an important missing piece often?
Yeah, you absolutely cannot be a masterful negotiation if you don't have emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence shows in your level of self-awareness. So how am I occurring to others? So understanding, one, how am I acting, but then also how am I occurring to others through the way I speak and communicate. So I might be saying something directly, but if it comes across abrasively and I have no awareness that my directness occurs as abrasiveness, then that's a challenge. But being able to recognize how you're conducting yourself and read the room and read the situational context is emotional intelligence. Also, in a stressful environment, self-regulation and regulation of other people's emotions is critical. If you've got limited capacity to regulate your own emotional state under pressure, under stress, and you start leaking through being short with people or acting in a way that is showing your stress, that's then putting the energy in the room with your team at a disadvantage, or the other person's reading your discomfort, then you're changing the dynamic of the power balance in the room. So that emotional regulation about managing your stress state becomes really, really important, so that you don't say things you're not supposed to say or offer things that you shouldn't offer. But also in a high stress environment where the stakes are high, emotions get heightened. And if someone on the other side is feeling particularly emotive about a certain agreement that they want, you might have to downregulate their emotional state. And if you don't have the emotional intelligence to manage your own, your capacity to manage someone else's emotional state is also then compromised. And EQ shows up in your decision making, because your decision making needs to be from your prefrontal cortex, your executive center, not your limbic system. So if you haven't regulated your emotions, you're in your limbic system and your nervous system's activated, and therefore your decision making is compromised. Also, without emotional intelligence, your interrelationships with others are compromised, because, as I said, your ability to read the room or your social awareness is lower. And that's why I say with negotiation capability, EQ is an absolute prerequisite for mastery in the subject.
What is the role of email in negotiations?
The role of email is to confirm the agreement, not necessarily to be the source of the negotiation process. However, I would say, whilst that's the ideal, because negotiations on email are 3 times more competitive, because people get brave behind a keyboard, and also they result in deadlock 50% more often than non-email communication. is still a large source of negotiation as a platform. I would say it has its place, but in an ideal world, you would only use email to confirm the agreement that you've made either on the phone or on Zoom call or a in-person meeting. Where you are negotiating on email, I would say do it so with caution. Recognize it's got more opportunity for deadlock because people are assuming the tone you put in. There's also an email record so that it's much easier to analyze your position, especially now with AI around sentiment, what your moves indicate in terms of your power and your leverage. And because it's asynchronous, it gives more people time to consider their response so you don't hear their immediate reaction to your proposal. So
you just touched on AI. Today, by the time this comes out, in a couple of weeks, we could be in a completely new environment, right? The world is changing fast relating to AI. So what's the most important thing that a leader needs to understand about AI as it relates to negotiating now? And what perhaps, to flip that, what is it not possible that AI can do that a human negotiator can?
I think the use of AI has to be used in complementary with the human, because the emotional intelligence, as we've talked about earlier, isn't something that the AI is going to bring into the room. But if you're in an in-person negotiation or on the phone or live with someone, and it's the relationships that count more than anything, because people buy more from people they trust than people they don't, unless you've got higher power balance. But if you've got a low power and low leverage, they're going to buy from someone they like more than the one that they don't like. So the relationship piece is the piece that is human, and being able to understand the nuances of communication and the distinctions in the room. But where AI will support, and then this is what I say is negotiation capability supported with AI is going to be far greater than negotiation capability without AI. It allows you to analyze the deals. It allows you, if on email, to construct analysis on what you're going to send them so that you're not leaving yourself exposed. So put it through the, if I send this, show me all the ways that I could be undermining my position here. Show me all the ways that my tone might offend, and what can I do to mitigate against this. So I think AI is an absolute game changer for people's negotiation capability. I've seen it with friends and neighbors having conversations with builders or tradespeople, or raising a dispute, where the natural communication capability might not be there, but now they can act like, an elite negotiator, and how can I protect myself in a way that gets the outcome I want, whilst using language that is warm and trust building and relationship oriented. So there's ways AI can be a superpower for us, as long as we have the emotional intelligence to actually direct its use and capability. And certainly to do the maths of a deal is far quicker using AI than having to start thinking about the deal and doing the maths of the exercise ourselves.
Last question, and one perhaps a little bit more personal. I find it fascinating, your perspective, and this is reflected in the book, and the fact that you got these 2 distinct awards, which is very much data-driven, analytical, focused on the numbers, and equally a perspective that is heavily weighted in emotional intelligence and psychology. So for you, what brings you joy about negotiating and the art? I don't want to say the art of the DEAL, because there was another book written about that.
Yeah.
But about what brings you joy about the industry, the topic of negotiation.
Honestly, the skill, or the developing the mastery, and I would say I'm still far, I've got a long journey to develop my level of mastery in it, because as I said, knowledge is one thing, but embodiment of that knowledge, as demonstrated my own inability to ask the pertinent question with my own house purchase, just shows me how I can be a better person. And what brings me joy, selfish, it gives me an opportunity to measure how effective I can be in being a better Glin. in? Am I able to get better outcomes? Am I able to influence for good organizational results in a way that founders can feel great about, their growth in their organization, but teams can feel good about the leadership and everyone feels great that they're making a meaningful contribution. Negotiation, as I said, in its simplest form is all about the agreements we make and the conversations we have to reach those agreements. And if I can help people make better agreements with themselves and others, that fills my cup, because it's showing me that I'm being a better human for myself as well.
Thank you. What a lovely personal reaction. Thank you. What is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
Without hesitation, if you have not read Dr. Benjamin Hardy's The Science of Scaling, I would encourage you to pick that book up. So if any CEO, founder, executive within a corporate is looking to grow their organization and do it rapidly and connect the dots between identity and performance, it is a superb book to help.
Thank you. Where can people learn more about you and the work that you do?
I would say LinkedIn is the best source. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, Glin Bailey on LinkedIn, and then I've got Simply Glin, my website, which is currently being updated because I'm shifting my own future identity in the moment. But I would say LinkedIn is definitely the more consistent source to hear about what I'm working on at current.
Beautiful. What haven't we covered off today that you'd hoped to cover off?
I don't think anything really. It's been an absolute pleasure to actually have the space to talk about negotiation from the identity lens, which is a testament to you and your questions. So thank you very, very much.
Well, I don't care what you say. It is my pleasure. It has been such a joy today to dig in with you into the way that you think, the way that you're positioning. So Shane, thank you so much, Glin, for sharing your wisdom with our audience today.
You're most welcome.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.